So a boolean value in JavaScript can have two different values, true or false. So you say var test equals true. Could it work like this? With lowercase. Let's see. You see there is an error. But remember here, I always go to PHP because you would program both. True. So in PHP is case insensitive. In JavaScript it isn't. So it's better to use always lowercase in both so you don't get confused, okay? But if in a PHP exam you get this one and you say no, an error, because maybe you remember from you don't pass the exam. So in PHP it's case insensitive. You can write it whatever you want, but in JavaScript it's case sensitive. So lowercase. Okay, this is the boolean true.
Now we have a keyword highlighted.
The
Highlighting is good.
okay, yeah. Then you can, once that you have this one, you can, let's test type of test. Okay, and you see there is boolean. Wait, so we have seen string, we have seen number, now we have seen boolean. And boolean are used also when we are going to use if cases, but boolean is not always the true or false value. I can have an operation that returns a boolean. So I can say that test is equal 4 greater than 5. So this operator returns a boolean value. So I can capture that boolean value into a variable. So you can see that it's false. Okay? So it's not only the constant true or the constant false that I can put in a variable to have a boolean result. I can test also an operation that can return a boolean value. Okay, so the best thing about boolean, or the main things to know about boolean is when you use the if and the else construct. For example, let's say if test, if is always going to verify a boolean operation. So if you say if test, okay, I can alert okay. It didn't alert okay. I can put if test alert okay, else. Else alert not okay. And it said not okay. The same thing we can use for any operation here. I can say if 6 greater than 5. It will say not okay. Why? Because it's going to return a boolean value. Okay? Now in this case it's greater, then it's going to put okay. So if always evaluate the expression inside the parentheses to a boolean. So you can say, for example, if 6 plus 5, okay? And you say, okay. For example, in Swift, you couldn't do that. In Swift language, it would be an error because 6 plus 5, it doesn't return anything. And so you can't perform that operation in Swift. But in PHP, in JavaScript, you can do it. Because 6 plus 5 is a number. A number is, in this case, is greater than 0, and it's okay. Let's see if we...
6 minus 7?
Eh?
6 minus 7.
You were not programming C, remember. Not in C. -1 is not false.
Minus 7.
No, tell me the operation. What?
6 minus 7.
This is true.
Yeah. -1.
Okay, no, anything that is different than 0. If you want to be false, you have to put 6 minus 6. It returns 0, and 0 is false in JavaScript. In some other language, 0 is a number, is not a boolean, and then you're not gonna have that conversion automatically. And say in our case, because 0, and this is a good question. Remember, 0 is false in PHP, is false in JavaScript. Let's try this one. If 0.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna give you a hint. Let's just try in PHP.
In PHP or false?
Yeah. PHP converts.
Okay. Okay. So remember, it's not the same thing. Here we have false. Say 0. No, let's try. Let's put an if here. If result else where
Result.
okay problem is for speaking people who speak Spanish and mainly from Latin country, any consonant at the end we don't pronounce it. And so we type, so we say, for example, in Latin America, in the Caribbean, Cuba, Dominican Republic, we don't pronounce the S. For the plural, for example, casas, we say casa. So if you don't use the article, you don't know. You for example, la casa, las casas. So, echo true, echo false. You see that is false. In JavaScript, you can say that say okay, because it's inside a string. So what should we do? We can transform it to a boolean, or we can just simple say not okay. Okay, because we cast to a number, and if that number is 0, it's going to be false. So pay attention to that. Or you can also do like this. You can wrap that into the boolean constructor. No, it didn't transform it to no, in boolean it says false also, so you have to implicitly cast it to a number so that is 0. Okay, whenever you have to deal with numbers, and if you want to test if a number is other than 0, then cast it to a number. So we have this weird thing from JavaScript. Why? For example, one of the examples that I found this bug is they injected JavaScript from PHP into the template. For example, I'm going to show you part of the code here. If I remember, it was here in this view. It was in new order here. You're going to see a lot of variable injected into JavaScript from PHP. Okay? You see all these variables are injected. And can you see here? Multiply by 1. OCF required. If you don't multiply by 1 and the string is empty, you get a JavaScript error. So if you take off this one, and by chance this variable is not set in the controller, you're going to have something like this in the JavaScript output, and it's going to be an error. You say, okay, we could do this. We can put the string here, and we solve the problem, because if the string is empty, it's going to be like this. But what about if we have used 0 to say that is not required and 1 that is required? You would get this one in JavaScript. When this page is processed by PHP, you would have this result. And it would be true. And that was a bug that I fixed. All this multiplying by 1 was being put it there because there was this error. And even there was a parameter that was called on-off. So I have to go to the controller and put a ternary operator to transform on off to a variable, to a true to a boolean value. What about if this variable in PHP is a boolean value, true or false? We would have here false. And let's say in JavaScript, let's test this error. All these things are bugs that I have corrected. And why? Because people think, okay, I'm coming from Java, I can program in JavaScript. Or I come from Java, I can program in PHP. I put $1 in front of every variable and it's done. No, it's not so easy like that. You have to, of course, you have maybe 60% of the knowledge. Okay, case, switch, and things like that, but study. Read the manual. So, okay. So what if we have like this, false? Okay, that's the problem. That false in a string is true. And it say, okay. And that was another bug because they were injecting the false here. And the same problem is when you're sending data from the client side to PHP. So you go here and to the URL and you say require equals false. PHP is going to read this as a string. And I have fixed also an error like that because they were reading from a checkbox and the checkbox was returning false or true as a value. On the JavaScript side was okay because it was a JavaScript side. But if you read that value and put it into a URL parameter and you send it to the server, every parameter that you pass is a string. It's up to you to transform it into something that has a meaning to the server. False, you say, okay, if it's equal false, I put the constant false or 0. Okay, the same thing goes for some other type of variable. If you have a string that is a JSON representation, you have to cast it into a JSON.
How can we this string return it to boolean?
In PHP?
No, like in here. You have string false.
Yeah.
And you want to return false boolean.
In PHP to the server? Yeah, you can do it. And you know how to do it because we saw it here. So give me an idea. So you say, okay, I got false in JavaScript. I need to pass false to PHP.
But no.
No,
The string return to be boolean, not string, but boolean. If you return like this, string false, it will be true.
okay, you can put it like this.
So it not could be transformed to boolean.
No. Okay. You have to split your cast because if you pass the boolean constructor, you're going to see, for example, that it reads.
Well, then I think it's about string.
No number, boolean.
Yeah, but this is string.
This will be true. Yeah.
You say it returns true because for him it's a string. Okay, but if you pass, for example, it can cast it to a boolean because it's a boolean operation. So the idea is in PHP, you know that PHP is better. Every time you have to exchange data from the client side to the server side, use 1 and 0 because for PHP 0, even if it's a string, is false. So if you have to send a value from JavaScript to PHP to be boolean, it's better to use 0 and 1 instead of using false or true, because then on PHP you have to say if require equals false, the string false, then you do that. It's better to use 0 and 1, and then if you use 0 in JavaScript, you cast it to a boolean or to a number by multiplying by 1, and in that way you get rid of the trouble of thinking if it's the string false or not. Okay, so this is very important because there are a lot of bugs about using falsy values in in JavaScript and in PHP. Why? Because if you say, for example, let's say a test. One. It has memorized this. I have used it long time before. So the result, true or false? Who votes for true?
Igor.
Bravo, book. True. Now let's use this. Oh, gosh,
We know it's a time.
okay, the same thing goes for PHP. So here JavaScript casts this string to a number, and then it confronts two numbers, okay, 0 and 0, or a string to a number. Here it said, is it the same value
But it uses the type.
and also the type? No, because this is type number and this is type string. Okay, so in this case, sometimes it's if you want to verify a falsy value, and if you want 0 to be a falsy value, you can put an if, okay, and 0 could be an error. But if you are inserting, remember PHP, if you're inserting a price and that item is free, and you put 0, and you say if item alert you haven't inserted a value, and the client say, God damn it, I inserted the value, it's 0. So in that case you say if item equals empty string, because you are verifying a number, and 0 has to be a number or could be a number, then don't use the falsy verification, use the 3 signs to verify, cast to a number, and then verify whatever you want. But remember that 0 can be false, and if you are expecting a number, 0 could be a right value. So you have to take that into account also in JavaScript. So it's better always to use the 3 equal signs. The other thing is null. Null is a mess everywhere. You say, for example, null equals 0, false. But false. But if you say if, let's say this variable here, but test, I think we still have test, let's put test to null. Okay, let's say if test alert. Okay, can you guess? So null is false in an if, but if you compare null equals false, it returns false. They are not equal. But null itself is false. So you get a headache. You get a headache. And you say null equals undefined. Come on. True because you feel it, or true because you're throwing a stone into the dark?
I think it's false.
Who said that is true? Great. But why? Because if you put, for example, now we have test equals null. I'm gonna say, for example, var test2 with no value. Okay. Now I'm gonna say test2 equals null. True or false? Var test. Okay, raise your hands. Question? True, because this variable, you have declared this variable, but it doesn't have any value. And for JavaScript, it's null. There's nothing in that variable. Okay? There's another concept in JavaScript that is called undefined. So we had this theory. But if we put 3 sign, it's not going to be the same thing. Okay? It's false because undefined is a type in JavaScript. Okay? It's a type. Like null is a type. And null in JavaScript is very buggy because null is also the representation of an object. Okay? let's see type of, then you're gonna fall down to earth. Type of test2. So var test2, I haven't given any value. Test2, I haven't given any value to test2. So what would you think would be the output? So how can JavaScript tell what type of okay?
Be null.
Or no.
Not because I haven't given a value. Let's see. Let's put now test2 equals null. Okay. First it was undefined. Now is null. Okay. Now you have to be careful with the question. Now,
No.
No.
what's the type?
Not.
Object. And that's
Not the subject. Now the subject, no?
because Java has to do something with it, because Java, if you have an object that hasn't been initialized, is null. So this is a goddamn bug in JavaScript, that if you don't know that, you say if type of test do diverse different than undefined, and it's all okay, and it's different than undefined because it's object, and that's an error. That's a big error. So you don't want to have any problem, give a default value to your variables, okay? Because otherwise it's going to happen like that. Now let's test if I put this variable that doesn't exist. What would I have here if I press enter?
Undefined, which one? Error.
No, decide. Undefined?
Variable.
Okay, Milan. Error?
Error, okay.
Okay, error because I haven't defined it. An error, okay. Now, second tricky question. Type of test3.
Undefined.
Who votes for undefined? Okay, Ivan, Milan, Bogdan, c'hai un culo, cama. Undefined. Bogdan, no, book, you have. Okay, because, so if you want to verify, that if a variable has been defined, the only thing you can do is to type of that variable and verify if it's equal to undefined. But the problem is that test2 is going to yield undefined, even if you put var test2. So if I say type of test2, no, because I put null inside. We saw that it was object, but let's declare another variable, var test4. Okay, type of test4 is going to be also undefined. So when you get an undefined result, you don't know if the variable doesn't exist or it exists but it doesn't have a default value. No problem, for you it's the same thing. You don't care if it has been designed and is null. It doesn't have anything, you say, you can use that. The difference is that you can put if test4, okay, alert, okay, and no error. But if you say if test5, that does not exist, never been declared, you get the error. Okay, that's the only difference. If you put a variable in if statement, that variable has to be declared. Okay.
Why not in type of? Why
Because type of is a function
Okay.
that can receive a variable, and it's a language construct, and then you can pass also a literal that does not exist. But if once a boolean, he tries to cast the value to a boolean, and trying to cast a variable that does not exist yields that error. Instead, type of is a construct. It's something that is inside the language, and then type of can deal with that. It begins to verify what type of that variable is, and then the engine says, okay, I'm gonna look in all the declared variables. This variable isn't in there, then it's undefined. Okay, I found the variable, but it doesn't have a value, then it's undefined. If doesn't reason like that, if just say cast to boolean, and then there's the problem. So if you're not sure that the variable exists, all we use if type of variable different than undefined and, okay, so in this case you don't have an error. You say so if you're not sure that the variable exists, always verify if type of variable equals the string undefined or equals the constant, the construct undefined, okay? And then you put another and that value is equal, I don't know, 23, you don't have an error because the and short circuits the operation. If the first one is false, it's not gonna evaluate the second. Okay, so if the first one is okay because the variable has been defined, then the second one is gonna work. So always verify if you're not sure that the variable exists. There is another trick. You can say if window dot test, let's say test 8, alert. Okay, I haven't defined test 8. Who can tell me if this works or it yields an error?
An error.
Okay, I can forgive you because we haven't learned objects, but no error. Because I'm verifying if there is a property in an object. And when you verify if there is a property in an object and that property does not exist, it returns null and that there's no problem. So one way to avoid the type of, if it's a global variable, you can verify if that variable exists in the window object. And then you get rid of the type of. Because if, for example, I can say window, remember that if I declare that variable with var test 8, okay, equals 4, I can access that variable in the object. It's a property of the object, test 8. But if I say window dot any string, it's going to say undefined. So it's not going to yield an error because you are trying to read a property from the object. Of course, if you try to invoke a function that exists in that object, that's different because the function does not exist. But a property, you can verify if that property exists. So one way to avoid the undefined problem is to verify if that variable is inside the window object. But if you're verifying that if a variable is in the window object and you wrote the program, it means that you're not writing in good code because you are trying to verify a variable that is in the global object. And so first you create your own app, say var my app, and then you initialize your app as an object. Okay, that's the way to do it. Then inside my app you put whatever you want. My app dot, for example, first name equals Adrian. And after that, you don't have to verify the window object. You can verify every variable from your app. Okay, and you're not going to have the undefined error. So if you're trying to say if type of variable undefined, of course, if you take a legacy code, that's the only way to go. But if you write your own code, you create a kind of a namespace with this syntax, but we're going to see it in the next lesson when we're going to learn functions and objects, okay?